Here's a question to think about. Which of these games is a prisoner's dilemma? Is all three? Is it just 1 and 3? Is it 2 and 3 only, or 1 and 2 only, or some other possibility? This is a question that has a very easy answer to arrive at. But I will predict that many people will get this question, or one like it, wrong on quiz 2. It would be useful, therefore, for you to think about this question before you get to quiz 2 and make sure you know, how would I decide whether a game is a prisoner's dilemma? There's a way you can do that. If you can't do it now, think about it and get up to speed before you come and sit for the second quiz. These are points you can get. You don't want to leave them on the table. Okay, I want to come back to the issue of prisoners' dilemmas, which we talked about last time. More generally, commitment problems, problems that can be solved if we can find some credible way to commit ourselves to behave in a way that the standard self-interest model wouldn't predict we would behave when the time comes to act. In the prisoner's dilemma, it's clear if we could commit to remain silent, we would want to make a credible commitment to do that. That way we'd get a lighter sentence. The fact that we can't commit is what we saw resulted in a worse outcome for each player. People have been thinking about these problems for a long time. There are ways to try to change people's incentives to solve these kinds of problems. The mafia has a solution for the literal prisoner's dilemma. They tell you that the DA's incentives aren't the only ones you have to worry about. If they were, you would have a dominant strategy, which would be to confess. They would get to convict you of the crime you committed. You'd spend a long time in jail, but not as long as you'd spend as if you remained silent and your partner confessed. The mafia tells you, if you confess, there's an additional thing to consider. When you get out, somebody you care about isn't going to be there anymore. It's a huge change in the payoff matrix. And that's enough in most cases to get people to think of it as a rational strategy to remain silent, a dominant strategy even to remain silent. That was the solution from the mafia's point of view. It's contrary to the solution from the prosecutor's point of view. For him, it wasn't a prisoner's dilemma. From his perspective, it was a great thing. You know, I can put the prisoners in their cells and know that it's a dominant strategy for them to do what I want them to do. So perspective matters. A game that's a prisoner's dilemma viewed by certain parties is not when viewed by others. We're concerned with the parties who are in the prisoner's dilemma. How do they solve their commitment problem? The helmet rule was an obvious device. If people were free to take their helmets off, they would, but they're not free, and they like that. They like that they're not allowed to play if they take their helmets off. It's a commitment device. We've talked about the issue of getting good service in a restaurant. Let's suppose that the incentives are such that it would be efficient to provide good service. The restaurateur wants them to get good service. He's prepared to pay a price of $100 a day to get it. The waiter can provide good service, but he can also provide bad service, and the most he can pay the waiter is $60 a day if the waiter gives bad service. So I could give you more if you provide good service. I'll give you less if you don't. The problem is, even though it would be efficient to provide good service, it only costs the waiter $30 extra to provide it. The owner is not there to monitor whether the waiter provides good service, and so the waiter's incentive is to defect on this agreement and provide bad service because that's easier for him. The tip is the solution proposed by the owner. Let the diner monitor the quality of service and leave a tip if he likes it, and not if he doesn't like the service. The problem is if the diner's never going to come back, how does the diner have any incentive to provide the tip in that case? It works in a local restaurant, according to the self-interest model, not in a restaurant that people visit only once or infrequently. So go to a restaurant on the road, don't leave a tip. That's the rule from the self-interest model. Is that what people do? No, that's not what people do. The data suggests that the tipping rate's nearly the same when people dine in restaurants they're not going to visit again as when they dine in ones they patronize regularly. So why doesn't the self-interest model work in terms of predicting behavior in that case? I'm going to adopt as my goal today the task of smuggling moral sentiments into traditional models of rational choice. They don't appear in those models. The narrow version of the self-interest model, the one favored by most economists, is one that says that self-interest may not be the only important human motive, but it explains 99.9% of all observed human behavior. That's incorrect. It's an important human motive, but it doesn't explain 99% of all human behavior. And we're going to want to consider the possibility of weighing other motives when we try to predict what other people will do, when we indeed decide what we ourselves ought to do. The strategy I'm going to pursue is to suggest that people who are not narrowly self-interested may be better positioned than others to solve important commitment problems. And they solve them not by having different material incentives than others, but by having different psychological incentives. Somebody will go and complain to Betsy Dick that what I talked about today wasn't really economics. I disagree. You're, of course, welcome to complain about anything you want to complain about. But before you complain, consider the possibility that what I'm going to talk to you today about is very much at the heart of the kind of economics you ought to be concerned about. Just consider the possibility. There are multiple standards of rationality. Economists generally confine their attention to two. One is the one that is the dominant model. It's the self-interest standard. It says people are rational under that standard if they're efficient in the pursuit of interests that are selfish, narrowly construed. We don't take Mother Teresa to have been a self-interested person under this standard. Some people will say, and some psychologists actually do try to argue, Mother Teresa was just a selfish person. Why? Because she took pleasure in helping the poor. That's not what we mean by self-interest. That's a perversion of the ordinary English language understanding of the concept. You're selfish if you pursue things that benefit you, not others. That's just a definitional matter. I won't say the psychologists who argue she was a selfish person are barking up the wrong tree. Maybe they have their reasons for wanting to argue that. As a terminological distinction, that's not the way we talk about this issue in economics. Mother Teresa was not a selfish person. She was behaving outside the predictions of the narrow self-interest model. Cartoons capture the idea often. Here's a grandfather telling his grandson as they walk through the forest, it's good to know about trees. Yeah, the environment is important. Think about aesthetics and the blue sky and the clean air. But just remember this, nobody ever made any big money knowing about trees. That's not true, actually. There have been lots of people who've made big money knowing about trees, but what I think the cartoonist meant for him to mean was that you got to watch out for number one in this world. If you think about other people and worry about their interests, you're going to be swept away by ruthless competitors at every turn. If you don't attend to your own interests, you're not going to make it in this world. That's the message, basically, of the self-interest approach to human behavior. And the advantageous aspect of that point of view is that it makes testable predictions about human behavior that can be refuted by data. So a self-interest theorist would say, why do people join volunteer organizations? They say it's to help others. Ha, they scoff. Let's look and see who joins these organizations and then reflect on that claim. So who do we see in the Kiwanis Club and the Rotary Club and the United Way Drive? We see there are lots of dentists who are active in those organizations. There are auto dealers. There are restaurateurs. There are chiropractors. We see lots of real estate agents. Okay, that is a non-random sample of the community. Notice, if we look at who's not on the list, it's another non-random sample. We see people like truck drivers. I belong to a volunteer organization. I'm on the board of directors of a local volunteer organization. There are no truck drivers in our group. If one wanted to be in our group, we would be totally open to the idea of admitting a truck driver into it. No one's ever asked. There are no postal employees in our group. There are no airline mechanics. There are no customs inspectors. None of these people. No electrical engineers. They're not there. What's going on here? Why are some people likely to join, others much less likely to join? The hard-nosed economist says, I've got a ready explanation. These people here all have something to sell. They're trying to expand their network of contacts in the community. They make more money if they come to these meetings. They endure the pain of the meetings because they get something from it. These people, they go to the game, they play cards, they read a book, they, go to a meeting. Why should I go to a meeting at night? What a pain that would be if I had to go to a meeting. And so score one for the self-interest model. They get this one as a prediction that's informative. It helps you understand a little bit better about what's going on. Do you want to conclude that the people who join these organizations don't care about helping the community? No, that doesn't follow. That doesn't follow. But there's more to it than that, quite evidently. We see tons of examples where the self-interest model doesn't predict what people do. A sociologist, Harvey Hornstein, took a bunch of wallets, hundreds of them, put them in a dryer for 50 hours so they'd get all scuffed up. Then he put identification cards in them, a little bit of cash, some laundry receipts, some library cards and whatnot, and put them on sidewalks in New York City and waited to see what would happen. New York City, a tough city. Did I mention the bus driver? The account of the bus driver, he pulls up to a stop. There's a 90-year-old woman in a walker struggling to get to the door. He looks out and says to her, "Ma'am, you don't need a bus, you need an ambulance." The doors close and off he goes. Tough town, New York. So what's going to happen in New York if we put wallets with cash on them on the sidewalk? We're never going to see them again. That's the clear prediction of the self-interest model. What happened? After some measure of time, half the wallets came back with the cash intact. It was a small enough amount of cash that nobody could have been hoping to get a reward for their trouble. Most people didn't even leave a return address when they mailed and they went to some expense. They stood in line at the post office. They paid the postage. They endured being told by a postal clerk that they didn't have the right kind of tape. They had to go get some different kind of tape and then come back. They could mail it. Half of them came back. That's not predicted by the self-interest model. The Falklands War, another clear, troubling observation for the self-interest model. The Argentines invaded the islands. They're windswept, desolate islands off the coast of Argentina, way south. Average temperature, 37 degrees Fahrenheit, rains all the time, winds blow hard. It's miserable there. There's nothing of great value there. There's a small number of British subjects who live there. They keep sheep. You could transport them, their sheep, everything they own to Scotland, give them a big castle to live in, and a pension for life. It would cost less than going to war with the Argentines over their invasion of these islands. The Argentines had a historical claim to the islands. They called them the Malvinas. They said, the British stole them, we're going to get them back. They invaded, they occupied them. Thatcher had a decision to make. What should we do? The islands are worthless for the cost of sending the fleet down and circling once and then going back without doing anything. That would be more than enough to finance resettling the Falklanders into better conditions than they were living in now. Why don't we just do that? The easy answer is that Thatcher scored points by standing up to the Argentines. They spent many tens of millions of pounds on the battle with the Argentines. People were killed, a lot of people were killed. They recaptured the Falklands. But what was the point? The Argentine writer, Jorge Luis Borges, summarized the dilemma. This war was like two bald men fighting over a comb. There was nothing of value there. Why should they fight over? Why didn't they just say, take them? The Falklands, take them. Call them the Malvinas if you want to. It costs more than they're worth to try and get them back from you. Well, to say Thatcher scored points isn't to answer the question. Then you have to explain why people gave her points for doing that rather than giving her points for not doing that. If it didn't make sense to do it, why did she get points for doing it? Well, you could say there was national honor at stake. National honor isn't part of the self-interest model unless it's instrumental in achieving some other goal. So maybe in the 19th century, Britain had a far-flung empire. They needed to send a credible signal that they were willing to defend it even when what was at stake in any one episode was not as valuable as what it would cost them. So they would defend small outposts like this just on purely rational grounds as a signaling mechanism. But now there's no empire. What is it? They're worried about people invading now. Gibraltar. It's not valuable to the UK. Maybe the UN wants to defend Gibraltar, but the UK, take it. What if they invade Britain? Well, we'll fight to defend that. We don't need to send a signal about our willingness to do that. Of course you fight to defend yourself, but this was puzzling behavior. If you want to offer national honor as a motive, then you have to explain why national honor, how did that come to be a motive? Rescues. People went back into the towers after they were struck to get other people out. They got killed in the process of doing that. The risk was clear. They had people they cared about inside. They wanted to get them out. They went in and did it. And many of them got killed in the process. Why did they do that? Self-interest model, it's got nothing to say about that. Nothing useful to say about that. If you want to insist that the self-interest model explains 99.9% of human behavior, read some of the books about what people did in the wake of this tragedy. There was an experiment in Wisconsin. People had given blood. You're not a weird person if you gave blood, so don't offer that as an explanation. This was an unrepresentative sample. That's why they were weird. They'd given blood. Most of you have given blood. They were in the waiting room after having donated their pint, and then a researcher came and said that there was a woman who was dying of leukemia, and she needed a bone marrow transplant. All the other therapies had tried and they had failed. All her relatives had been tested. Nobody was a suitable tissue match. Would you be willing to let the blood you just donated be tested to see if your tissues would make you eligible to be a bone marrow donor for this woman? They asked, the self-interest model has a clear prediction what they would say. No. I'm going to come into the hospital. They were told what it involved. You come to the hospital the night before. They wake you up at dawn. They put you under general anesthesia. They make incisions above each hip. They drill into your pelvis. They aspirate out about a quart of bone marrow, and then they sew you back up. Most people survive this procedure. The death rate, the complication rate is low, but it's not zero. and there's some discomfort involved. People asked what's going to happen to the kids if her mother doesn't recover. There was no relative who could care for them. They were going to go into foster care. They wanted to know what the kids were like. They wanted more information. Finally, though, the researchers told them, don't let us test your blood unless you're 50% sure you would be willing to become a donor if we found that your tissues were a suitable match. 90% plus of the people said, yeah, go ahead and test my blood. The prediction from the self-interest model is 0 on that number. Why would I do that? It's a stranger. That's not self-interest. That's concern about someone else that would make somebody do that. Tipping on the road, we've talked about, we could solve that problem with material incentives. We could put a plate out that said, you're tipped so far. You know, the waiter's worried he's not going to get a tip at the end. Give him feedback as you go along. You're tipped so far after each course. Oh, you're worried he's going to scoop the money off the plate and walk out with it? Then get one of those devices like they have in the bus. You know, you put the money in there and you can't get it out. You're tipped so far. We don't do that. Why don't we do that? Because, as I think I told you in a previous session, people leave tips when they're in places they're not going back to. You don't need to do that. People don't want to leave without having left the expected tip. You're a creep if you do that. And most people are not creeps. The narrow self-interest homo-economic stereotype is a creep. And he wouldn't leave a tip under those circumstances. Okay, so look, not all economists are naive to the fact that people don't behave literally the way the self-interest model predicts they'll behave. And so many of them are willing to admit of a broader suite of motivations besides narrow self-interest. They talk about what's called the present aim model. Under this standard, you're rational if you're efficient in the pursuit of whatever interests you happen to hold at the moment you act. We make no judgment about what you care about. Your preferences are your business. You want to eat a 40-pound chocolate cake in one sitting? You weigh 600 pounds already? That might not be good for you. That's not our concern. You want to do it? What do we require for you to meet the rationality standard under the present aim standard? That you not buy from a supplier who charges extra when there's no locational or quality advantage to be had by doing that. You just buy from the most efficient source of the 40-pound chocolate cake. So that's the present aim model. And that model is problematic in a different way. It's too powerful. And because it's too powerful, it's not powerful at all. I call this the crankcase oil problem. You see a guy, he gets on the trolley, he goes under his truck, he drains out the crankcase oil. He comes out, it's in a vessel, he drinks it, the sludgy, dark, used crankcase oil. He drinks the whole 4 quarts of it. You hadn't seen anybody do that before. And then he begins writhing in agony, and then 10 minutes later, he's dead right in the driveway, sprawled dead in the driveway. Oh, no problem. I'm a present aim theorist. How do we explain such puzzling behavior as that? We say, that guy must have had a really strong preference for crankcase oil. And we're done. That's not a good model, because if you have a model that lets you explain any strange thing that happens, then how could you test your model? A scientific model is a model that you can use to make predictions, compare the predictions you make with what happens, and then when they disagree, you modify your theory. Your model gets amended to take account of the fact that not all the predictions it made fit the facts that you observed. That's a scientific theory. This is not one. The present aim standard, well, good. It lets you include some tastes that you think people really do have, but it doesn't generate testable predictions most of the time. How many of you get a warm glow when you give to the pledge drive of the public radio station? I hope you think that's descriptive. You write your check or you give them your credit card number. Yeah, I've been thinking I ought to do that. I feel better now that I did that. I don't want a free ride off there. They tell you, if you don't contribute, we won't be able to bring you morning edition, morning after morning. And that's true. If everybody doesn't contribute, they won't. But if you don't contribute, it's still going to be on. Or, in an unlikely case, if you don't contribute and enough others don't contribute either, it won't be on. But no matter what, your contribution won't be the one that makes the difference, almost for sure. And so why would you get a warm glow from giving? Why don't you get a warm glow from not giving? From figuring out that it doesn't matter whether you give, and you'll have more money if you don't give for your own uses than if you do give. Why don't you get a warm glow from that? I'll show you some evidence later in the hour that economists, on average, do get a warm glow from that. They give less than others in similar situations. We teach that people will give less or give zero, and people who teach that do give less. This is partly why I raise this issue in great detail in our course. I do not want to send you out in the world thinking that if you're self-interested, the right thing to do is to be a creep. Okay, I'm going to urge you to consider a third standard of rationality. I call it the adaptive rationality standard. This is not a term in wide circulation. I, in general, as I confessed to you last time, have not been successful at coining new terms for things. This is the only term I know for this. If you want to call it by its name, you might have to explain what it is, but it's not hard to explain. And so what it is it's a more flexible standard. We say, yes, other tastes besides narrow self-interest seem to be important. But if you want to add a taste like that to your model, it's incumbent on you first to meet a test. You have to jump a hurdle. And that hurdle is you have to offer a plausible account of how somebody who had that taste would not be severely handicapped in her efforts to acquire the resources that are needed to survive in this world. That rules out the crankcase oil taste. How could you offer an argument that anyone would find credible that having a taste for drinking used crankcase oil would help you acquire the resources you need to get by in the world? It's going to kill you. It's not going to help you. It's going to kill you. All right, but the test this does require doesn't sound easy to pass. How could having a taste for giving money to NPR help you get by in this world? How could it help you acquire the resources you need? It seems like it does the very opposite. You're giving away resources that you don't need to give away. How could a taste for that help you get by in this world? And the mere fact that it eliminates the crankcase oil problem isn't enough to establish that we can offer a satisfactory answer to that other question. This is essentially a question, can ethical behavior survive in an intensely competitive environment? You have an opportunity to cheat, no one's looking. If you don't cheat, can you survive against competitors who do cheat? That's the question. And the answer I'm going to sketch will rest on a very simple claim. It's that self-interested persons are not very well equipped to solve a certain class of problems that we encounter in this world. The prisoner's dilemma is one of them, but there are many others. They're in general known as commitment problems. Schelling's kidnapper is a nice example. A kidnapper takes a victim and then suddenly gets cold feet. What a stupid thing to have done this kidnapping. I'm going to get caught. I'm going to get executed. Oh, if I could turn back the clock, I would do it. So why did I just let the guy go? I kidnapped him. He knows I kidnapped him. He knows that if I'm free, I'm going to be worried. He's going to realize that I could go to the police to reveal his identity, so he won't realize that he has to kill me to prevent me from doing that. So He's really in a bind. The kidnapper doesn't want to kill me, but he feels like he has to. I don't want him to kill me. I'm willing to promise not to go to the police if he lets me free, but the moment I'm at the door, I want to go to the police because I know he has no incentive not to kill me, even though he said he wouldn't if I promised, and he knows I have no incentive to keep my promise. We're stuck. So Schelling, who described this example in its early form, said, if the victim has committed a crime, maybe he's embezzled some money from his employer, he can give proof of that fact to the kidnapper, and that will serve as a commitment device. That will create a bond that will ensure that he won't go to the police. Not many people are in a position to do that. That's a clever solution, all right, but in the moment, it's very difficult to come up with solutions like that. Well, maybe you haven't embezzled any money from your employer. You could commit an unspeakably degrading act and allow yourself to be videoed in the process of it. And then that video would be a commitment device that keeps you from going to the police. Okay, yeah, maybe there are ways to solve it in the pure self-interest domain, but often there won't be any solution of that sort available. The alternative that the third standard of rationality wants to investigate is whether there are psychological mechanisms for solving a problem like this. And we've seen already the branch outlet problem. We know that the incentives that I described in that game lead the owner of the business to predict that they'll end up here if she opens the branch outlet, because the manager is going to get 1,500 compared to 1,000 if he manages honestly, so he'll manage dishonestly, and that means my best bet as the owner is not to go there. I'm not going to open. That's a loss for both. It's a commitment problem. If the manager, no matter how dark his heart might be, if he could credibly commit himself to manage honestly, he would want to do that. They need a mechanism that would allow them to do that. The very heart of the mechanism I'm going to talk about is captured in this drawing by the New Yorker cartoonist Modell. Disregard the sign around the man's neck. That's a distraction introduced by the cartoonist so you wouldn't turn the page too quickly and fail to get the point. The fact that he has that sign around his neck is counterproductive from the point of view of what he might reasonably be trying to achieve. He's trying to persuade potential buyers that if they don't buy a pencil from him, he will whip them. A potential buyer who doesn't need a pencil might say, plausibly, he's not going to whip me just to get me to buy a pencil. If he did that, he'd spend 10 years in jail for assault. And what person would be willing to pay that high a price just to get me to buy a pencil? So I'm not going to buy a pencil. Well, the pedestrian's wife says, I think we ought to buy one just to be safe, dear. Why does she say that? Because she thinks the pencil seller might not be rational. And the real reason it would make sense for her to think that is not the sign around his neck. As I say, that's counterproductive. The real reason that she might suspect that he's not rational is contained in a few very simple ink drawings right around the center of the man's head. Go home tonight, sit in front of your mirror, try to summon the expression that you see on the pencil seller's face. I hope none of you will be able to do a good job of that. If you see somebody who looks like that, you'd be well advised to conclude this guy's not playing with a full deck. There's something amiss up there. We can tell when there's something amiss. I was at a political rally as a graduate student. There was a big crowd in Sproul Plaza at Berkeley. Ron Dellums was giving an impassioned speech. Everybody was fired up, but there was one guy sitting on the asphalt completely stoned out of his mind, not responding in the usual way to the rhetoric in the speech. And into the crowd waded an Irish setter, sniffing around, got to the spot where this guy was sitting, lifted his leg, peed all over the guy's back. And the guy did nothing. How did the dog know he wasn't going to do anything? I don't know. But I wasn't surprised when he didn't do anything. There was something the kid was communicating that revealed to even a dog that he wasn't going to do anything. The dog didn't pee on me. He didn't pee on anybody around me who was paying attention to the speech. He peed on the one guy who wasn't going to do anything. We make inferences about what people are going to do based on very subtle cues that they emit. And we know more than we can explain to others about how we can do this. But that doesn't mean that the process isn't incredibly important. So there's going to be some version of this argument unfolding in what comes next. Okay, you want some signal that the guy who says he's going to manage your business honestly really is going to set aside the incentives that narrow self-interest confront him with when the time comes and actually follow through and manage it in an honest way. So let's suppose that we find somebody who has been conditioned in a culture that would make it so aversive to cheat somebody that you had promised to serve in a trustworthy way that you'd pay a huge sum to avoid the pain inherent in doing that. This is obviously not how you talk about morality to kids. When you're trying to teach them the right thing to do, you don't say, consider how much money you'd get if you cheated, consider how you'd feel about it if you cheated, if the utils from the extra money you get exceed the disutility you'd get from cheating, then cheat. You don't say that. This is just a crude descriptive model. It's not a normative model. It's not saying this is when you should cheat. This is saying this is a model that at least captures part of the picture of when people do cheat. When the incentives to cheat are stronger, they're more likely to cheat. So this guy really doesn't want to cheat. Why? Because he suffers a huge psychological penalty when he cheats. How huge? $10,000 worth. That completely makes the game into a new game. He's still getting $1,500 worth of payment for cheating, but now he's got this huge psychological burden that he has to carry from cheating, and the net payoff to him is, in effect, minus $8,500. If the owner knows that's how he's constituted, then she says, I can go on to point C confident that he'll choose the top branch. The question is, how does she know that?
So in like a socialization scenario, you have a lot of people involved in that process. So
yes.
Do all of their incentives have to be explained by this model as well?
It's a great question, and ultimately yes. It has to work. If the people who do this sort of thing go extinct, then where are they? We don't have them to talk about any longer. So what we know is that New York City professional couples, at many points in the past, I haven't seen anything recently written about this, but at many points in the past would advertise in the Salt Lake City Tribune trying to hire people to care for their children while they're at work during the day. Why would they do that? Why didn't they advertise in the New York Post? I'm guessing it was because they thought people raised in the Mormon tradition would be less likely to want to behave opportunistically when no one was looking. Are there Mormons who cheat? I don't know. But if I had to bet, so if somebody held a gun to my temple and said, are there any? I'd say, yeah, there must be some. But might it be a reasonable bet to pay extra for somebody from Salt Lake City because you thought it was way more likely that they wouldn't behave opportunistically in a situation like this? Yeah, you don't have to be right for sure if you're in a lot of different businesses. Some of them can fail. And if enough of them succeed, you're going to make money. So you have to be able to choose intelligently when you're hiring people for positions that require trust. You don't have to be sure you're right, but you need to have some signals that you think are informative. It can't just be, I'm honest, trust me. Everybody wants to say that. Okay, if you're the kind of person who would feel bad from doing the right thing, that can benefit you. It can help you go to sleep more easily at night. You get virtue is its own reward, all that. But in order for it to benefit you in the material realm, which is the challenge posed by the adaptive rationality standard, it's got to not penalize you in your quest to acquire resources that you need. So how can a taste like that help you maintain parity in competition with others who don't have that taste? If people can't tell you have the taste, it can't help you in that quest. Other people have to have some reasoned way of saying, yeah, I think that person's more trustworthy than the threshold that would need to be met for me to be willing to make it worth my while to trust that person. Okay, it could be a simple matter. Maybe all the people who are endowed with an impulse to cooperate look different from others. They have a birthmark on their forehead in the shape of a red C. What would happen in an evolutionary struggle where we had two types, some with a red C, others without one? The defectors would want to interact with people who had the red C on their forehead. But the people who had one would say, no, I prefer not to interact with you. Why? Because you're going to defect on me. How do you know? Because you don't have a red C. If it were as easy as that, the defectors would be stuck having to interact with one another. The cooperators would pair off successfully with others of their own type, and we would see the rapid extinction of the defectors. Why? Because the cooperate pair in the payoff matrix has a higher payoff than the defect pair. That hasn't happened yet. The defectors haven't gone extinct yet. I don't need to persuade anybody of that in this audience, probably. There are plenty of defectors out there. What you may be less willing to accept is that there's a very substantial number of cooperators out there. And it's a process. The cooperators try to identify one another to pair off and avoid pairing off with the defectors. And they're successful at it often enough that they hold their own in this struggle. That's the burden that my explanation has to be prepared to carry. So let's go to Darwin. Here are two dogs sketched in his 1872 book, The Expression of Emotion in Man and Animals. This dog is greeting its master. This one is ready to do battle. Note in the left-hand dog, it's the same dog, in the left-hand mood, the dog has multiple details of presentation that are functional in the process of doing battle with a rival for a resource, a bone or a mate, whatever it might be. His eyes are open as wide as they can be. They're darting around the visual. His ears are pricked forward. His fangs are bared. His weaponry is on display. He's ready to spring forward the way he's positioned in his body. The hairs on his back are standing on end. All that is a suite of responses that has to happen immediately if the dog is going to be competitive in a battle with another dog. What if it had to decide by going consciously through a checklist? Let's see, are the tiny non-striated muscles that surround each hair follicle constricted? So I'll look larger and more likely, therefore, to intimidate my rival? Check. Are my ears pricked forward? Check. He would be chewed to bits by the time he got through that checklist. A rival who is ready to go into action right away would have a decisive advantage. This has to happen immediately, in real time, when they're confronted with a threat. And Darwin's conclusion was that, therefore, if we see the dog in this posture, we know something about the electrical activity that's occurring in the dog's brain. There are involuntary pathways of nervous impulses that are going from the emotional centers in the dog's brain to make all these things happen right away If the dog didn't have that going on, he wouldn't have gotten as far as he's gotten. He would have been on the scrap heap of evolution's failures long since. What that means, according to Darwin, is that you can actually see credible signals of the emotional valence being experienced by the dog without looking inside his brain. There are external symptoms of what's going on inside his brain that he can't control. He can't say, I'm angry, watch out for me, when he's not really angry. He's got to actually really be angry in order to send the signals that he's sending. It's true for humans too. Certain emotions correspond to certain emotional expressions in the body, on the face, and in various other subtle ways. There are combinations of muscles in the face that occur in concert if we experience certain emotions, but are very difficult to make happen by conscious voluntary manipulation. Here's a slide that I made all by myself. I have no training in art. I never took a course in art. I'm not good at it, I don't think. My kids are good at art, at least two of them. They're good at art. I can show this slide in any country, and I can say, what's this person feeling? They won't laugh when I say this person. They'll know it's meant to be a person, even though it doesn't look much like any of you in any detail. What's this person feeling? And I'll get a very consistent set of answers across all the countries in the world where I might ask that question. What's this person feeling? He's concerned about something. Maybe he's feeling sad. Maybe he's feeling worried about something. If you have a friend and you go for a walk in the woods with a friend and you stub your toe, and your toe is bleeding profusely and you're in a lot of pain, writhing on the ground, reacting to this episode, and your friend doesn't manifest an expression roughly like that, you might want to ask yourself, how good a friend is this? If she did manifest that expression, it wouldn't be because she'd said, now let's see, I've got to summon a constriction of the pyramidal muscles here and the corrugator muscles here and get it to look like that. It would just happen. And if it doesn't happen, it wouldn't be for sure, but you might want to at least consider the possibility that she's not as concerned about you as you were hoping she might be in that situation. Oh, you got hurt? Who gives a damn, is what the lack of that expression would seem to be saying. Actors can do it on command, some of them. Maybe some of them are just sad all the time. Others remember when their dog got run over and they feel sad and they don't need to work to summon the expression. It just comes because they feel sad, and they could induce that emotion in themselves purposely. Others try the yogi method. That you just constant practice for decades. You gain control over muscles that are normally not under conscious control. But most people aren't in those categories. They're conveying information about how they feel about things truthfully in real time. What's this person feeling? Is he happy? Is he sad? What's he feeling? He's scared to death, is my guess. He's just seen a snake or an alligator or something. He's feeling terrified. That's how people look when they're terrified. Not to communicate to you that they're terrified, but because that expression comes involuntarily to their face when they feel terror, when they experience the emotion of terror. What's he feeling? Anger. In this case, it might be simulated anger. Anger is one of the expressions that's easiest to mimic when you don't really feel anger. Experienced observers can spot somebody who's faking anger more often than inexperienced ones, but you can get away with faking anger more often than other emotions. What's this guy feeling? He's at Saratoga. He bet on a long shot. The horse won. Whoa! He can't believe it. I didn't expect that to happen. I'm surprised and delighted that it happened. Here's one that's more directly relevant for the story I'm trying to tell you. It's a kid. It's not very clear. I'll explain what it's showing. It's a kid who is visiting the vet with his dog. At the moment the image was taken, the vet has just shoved a syringe into the dog's shoulder. It looks like a Shar-Pei puppy. Unbeknownst to the kid, the dogs don't seem to give a darn when the vet plunges the needle into them. It doesn't hurt them. That doesn't seem to even cause any visible reaction. But the kid doesn't seem to know that. He thinks the dog is experiencing great pain, and he is experiencing the pain he imagines his dog to be feeling. At least that's what I think when I look at this photo. A Homo economicus expert might think, oh, the kid's just pretending to feel the dog's pain. He doesn't care about the dog, actually. But that would be wrong, probably, to think that. Self-interest isn't the only thing animating this kid. This kid has a bond with his dog, and when the dog gets hurt, or when he thinks the dog gets hurt, it hurts him too. And that would be enough for him to want to leave a tip when he was dining at a restaurant he didn't expect to visit again, if he imagined that the waiter would be injured by the fact of him not leaving a tip after the waiter had provided good service. How does this happen? How do we get to caring about how others feel? This is an even bigger detour. Betsy Dick is really going to hear about this part. How many of you set your watch ahead? I used to. I now have a watch that's synchronized with an atomic clock somewhere, so it's I think I could still set it ahead, but it would be an extra step, so I haven't done that. But I used to, when I had a regular watch, I used to set it 10 minutes ahead. Why did I do that? How many of you do that? Okay, we do it because you get where you need to get to on time more reliably when you do that. That's why I did it at any rate. I knew what time it was. I set mine 10 minutes ahead, so when my watch looked like this and somebody said, what time is it? Without missing a beat, I would say, it's 10 o'clock. I could do X minus 10 in my head. In a flash. I didn't need a calculator. I didn't need any assistance or even any time to do it. So why did seeing 10:10 have any effect on my behavior if I knew in an instant that it was really just 10? I don't know the answer to the question, but I've been groping about to try to learn why it matters. I've collaborated with a neuroscientist on a project years back. I asked her, what about this hypothesis? You look at your watch, you see it says 10:10. That image is flashed onto your retina, the optic nerve, then takes it to the brain, but it takes it on multiple pathways. One of them takes it to the part of the brain that has the little math module that does X minus 10. And that module immediately informs you that it's really 10 o'clock, and so if anybody asks you, you can report that without delay. But it also sends the same image to the hippocampus, a little peanut-shaped part of the brain that houses a lot of our emotional responses, and that part of the brain doesn't do X minus 10. It just sees the image, and it knows I was supposed to be somewhere at 10:05, and it freaks out when it sees 10:10. And that is just the extra agitation I need to get me to abandon the thing I'm immersed in and get up out of my chair and get moving. So I thought that's my hypothesis. She didn't think that was right. So I don't know what the answer is. She wasn't sure, so I'm going to cling to that hypothesis until somebody persuades me that's not the answer. But it's something mechanical. That's really all I need for the purposes of this argument. The way we form bonds with other people isn't magical. It's mechanical. but it has magical consequences. They show us Chinese characters subliminally. That means we don't even know we've been shown them. We're watching slides from a show. In between slides, for thousandths of a second before the brain consciously registers that it's seen another image, one of these characters flashes on the screen. Do you know I've been doing that to you all morning long? No, I haven't been doing it. But I could have been, and you wouldn't know it consciously that I had been. And they show you some of them when you're pulling an oar toward you. Others you see when you're pushing the oar away. And it's randomized. Different people see different ones under different conditions. Then they show you a sheet full of Chinese ideographs. Which ones do you like? You like the ones you saw in quotes, because you weren't even aware that you saw it. You like the ones you saw when you were pulling the oar toward you. You don't like the ones you saw when you were pushing the oar away. It's just a simple pairing of approach and avoidance cues. The things that are good for you, you want to get closer to. The things that are bad for you, you want to push further away from you. You can't explain why you like some and why you like the others. That's just the way it works. They show you cartoons. Is this cartoon funny? There's no right answer to that question. Is it funny? What's the point? Well, it's supposed to be that if you majored in English, you don't have good job prospects out there. I thought it was funny when I saw it. A lot of people see that cartoon, meh. What's interesting, therefore, is this. If we show people not just this cartoon, but 50 cartoons, some people, we show them cartoons when they have a pencil between their teeth. Others, we show the same cartoons when they don't have a pencil between their teeth. The finding is the people who had a pencil between their teeth think the cartoons are funnier. What's going on? It's that when you feel pleasure or happy about something in your brain, there's an impulse that sends an instruction down through a nerve to make your mouth reconfigure in the shape of a smile. But it turns out that those same nerve pathways carry information back from the smile to those same areas of the brain. And if you smile, it makes you happier. And if you're not even aware that you're smiling, if you just have a pencil between your teeth, it makes you a little bit more charitable in your evaluation of these cartoons. The mere exposure effect. We show you these characters subliminally. You don't know which ones you've seen. Some of them you've seen 50 times, not 1,000. Others, only 5 times. Then later on, we say, here's a sheet full of characters. Are there ones you like? Are there ones you don't like? Tell us which ones you like. Which ones don't you like? The ones you've seen over and over again are the ones you like. The ones you haven't seen often are the ones you don't like. And there's nothing intrinsically different about the ones you like and the ones you don't like. It's the same with people. When you meet them, you have an immediate reaction, just like you do to anything. If I say, here's a clicker, good or bad? You probably think, what's he talking about, good or bad? It's a clicker. It's neutral, doesn't matter. Maybe it's not very good or very bad, but unbeknownst to you, you have a valence for this thing, a clicker. I like clickers. I don't like clickers. It may not be a very intense valence, but you have a valence to every single thing that enters your field of vision. You care about it, at least weekly. And that's true especially of people that you encounter. The things that cause you to like them are, how similar are they to you? If they're more like you, you like them better. If they're different from you, you're not as likely to have a positive valence toward them. Reputation colors your evaluation when you first encounter. If you've heard something good about the person, your initial reaction to what this person is all about is more likely to be positive based on the specific cues you're getting than if you'd heard something negative about that person. You'll interpret the same clues differently. Physical attractiveness is one of the most powerful predictors of this valence in reactions to people. Did your parents teach you that the world is fair? If they did, they were lying to you. The world is not fair. It's grossly unfair in more ways than I could possibly list. This is one of the ways. If you're born in the world physically attractive, you're lucky. People are going to like you better, and that's a good thing. You could get into debates about whether you could be so attractive that it becomes a handicap. Let's not worry about that. It's a factor in valence. Valence matters. If people are expressive, you like them better. You got two people. One is transparent about what she's feeling at every moment. The other one is more opaque. Who do you like better? The transparent one is consistently who people like better. Are there costs to being transparent? Yes. I think that's what people are keenly aware of who are transparent. There are also benefits to being transparent. You want to trust somebody? Who would you trust? A poker face or a transparent person? The initial exchange matters. If you happen to stumble on a pleasant topic in your first conversation, that's a huge impact on the initial valence. And here's why initial valence is so important. Once you have one, positive or negative, every subsequent piece of information you get about a person is interpreted with a bias. Rahul, I thought he was a nice person the first time I met him. I met him a second time, and I got some behavior to watch. It was, objectively speaking, a mixed signal. Some of the things he did I could view positively. Other things he did might raise questions in my mind. But if my initial impression was positive, the second time I meet him, I'm going to try to confirm that first impression. I'm going to focus on the things he did that are consistent with my first impression. I'm going to look for ways to prove that my first impression was right. If the first impression was negative, I'd look for the negative cues to prove we are terrible natural scientists. We look to confirm our hypotheses. That's not what we should do. We should try to disprove them. Look for ways to be skeptical about what we believe. Try to revise our theories when we get evidence that doesn't fit. Instead, we look for ways to prove that we're right. We mimic what other people do. If I yawn, you yawn. If I scratch my head like this, soon others are scratching their heads like this. If you don't do that, if you have no inclination to do that, people don't like you. This has been shown experimentally. A psychologist at NYU at the time trained his assistants to suppress their tendency to mimic other people. So they would talk to undergraduates, and the undergraduate would scratch, they wouldn't scratch. The undergraduate would stretch like that, they wouldn't do that. No mimicry. The other sample was undergraduates where they did not suppress their tendency to mimic what their conversation partners were doing. All the subjects left, and they were asked, do you want to meet with this person again? Free coffee, do you want to meet with them again? The ones where they suppressed their tendency to mimic, no, I don't want to talk to that person again. The others, yeah, they wanted to talk again. If people show no evidence that they're reacting to you, that they're sharing what you're about, then maybe that's not the kind of person that you want to continue in this sympathy dance with. Maybe that's an unpromising prospect for you to go forward with. They show people wedding photos. They cut them in half. Who married whom? People don't do any better than chance on that exercise. Who married whom? They'll put the Asians with the Asians. They'll put the blacks with the blacks. They won't do anything interesting in that experiment. They can't tell. Then They'll do a parallel experiment. They'll cut the 25th anniversary photos in half. Who married whom? People are pretty good at that. They get who's married to whom. What happens? You're reacting sympathetically to your partner for decades. You come to look like your partner. You make the same expressions. Your wrinkles align in similar patterns. If you interact intensively with other people, you develop a stronger sympathetic bond with them. So in Army units that were in heavy combat, people stay in touch with one another for decades. If they were as long together but didn't experience that kind of intensity, they lose touch after 6 months. Who are Tunney and Dempsey? They were the two legendary heavyweight prize fighters at the beginning of the 20th century. They almost killed one another in their 3 epic bouts. They pummeled one another within an inch of their... They hated one another. They absolutely hated one another. But they stayed in touch over the years. They reminisced. They had a bond. They were forged together by the intensity of their interaction. So, can you predict whether someone cares about you? Can you predict whether somebody would take your interests seriously when deciding whether to cheat? We did some experiments. It was meant to be a very weak test of the hypothesis that you can make predictions about what other people will do when you can't punish them for cheating. We put 3 students in a room together. They never saw one another. They had 30 minutes to talk to one another. They knew they were going to play prisoner's dilemma games for real money in pairs at the end of the 30 minutes. They would each go to a separate room. They'd have 2 forms each. What are you going to do with Mr. A? What are you going to do with Mr. B? Cooperate or defect in each case. What do you predict Mr. A is going to do in his game with you? Cooperate or defect. What do you think Mr. B is going to do? And people made those predictions and said what they were going to do. What did we find? We found that the cooperation rate was vastly higher than predicted by the Homo economicus model. 73% plus of the subjects cooperated. It was a one-shot prisoner's dilemma. You wouldn't know what anybody had done. You couldn't punish them for defecting because you didn't know what they did. We took the payoffs from the 2 games, added them together, and then threw in a random term on top of that. You saw your payoff when you left in total, but you didn't know who had done what. It's a one-shot prisoner's dilemma. The self-interest model says people will defect in that game. People mostly didn't defect, but that's not the interesting finding. That's actually an old finding. What we found was that when people predicted who would defect and who would cooperate, it's more instructive to look at predictions of defection. The base rate of defection, only 26% of the people defected, way less than the predicted amount from the self-interest model. If you predicted your partner would defect and your prediction was worthless, how often would you be right? 26% of the time. That's the base rate. By accident, you'd be right 26% of the time. I predicted she'll defect, she defected. That proves my prediction was valuable. Well, if my prediction was right 26% of the time, it produces evidence that my prediction added nothing. I didn't really make anything. When you predicted your partner would defect, the base rate was 26%. People defected at almost a rate of 57%, more than twice the base rate. That's after 30 minutes. How good would you be at predicting what somebody would do if you actually knew the person? I think it's reasonable to imagine that you'd do better than that. Here's the thought experiment I asked you to consider earlier. You're about to buy a car, you got an envelope with cash in it, you lost it. Can you name somebody who would return it to you? Most people say yes. I hope you say yes too. Who do you pick? Somebody with whom you've forged a sympathetic bond, in all likelihood. There are many people I would be able to identify, I feel, who would return a stranger's cash, somebody that they didn't have any bond with at all. So it's not just that you're inclined to do the right thing when it's with somebody that you have personal relationship bonds with. These could be broader than that. Economists, though, don't teach that. Economists teach their students that you'll cheat people if you can cheat them with no possibility of being detected. People are skeptical of economists for more than one reason, but I think that's one of the reasons they're skeptical. They know that's not the way people actually are. At least most people seem to know that. We wanted to know whether studying economics made you more likely to cheat. Think about it. How could it not? You teach people that in the prisoner's dilemma, people defect. That's what we teach. What happens in the experiment we did if you tell somebody, you're not supposed to know this, but we saw your partner's form, she defected? What do you think people do? 100%, they defect. She already defected, I'm defecting. You don't just want to be a chump in this world. You know, somebody's already defected on you, you're going to defect on them. So wouldn't it be strange if you stood up here for 20 years teaching your students that people defect when they're in this situation, if that didn't color your view of what other people were going to do when they found themselves in social dilemmas? How could it not? Well, it turned out that we have a few measures of this. The economists were vastly more likely to defect. These are the economics majors in our sample, vastly more likely to defect than the non-economics majors. The longer they had been an economics major, the more the difference was. So there was a slight humanizing tendency when psychologists and others went from being freshmen and sophomores to being juniors and seniors. They got a little bit more honest or trustworthy. They defected less often. That tendency was virtually non-existent among the economists. And we saw evidence that there was a difference between people on the first day of the class in a class like this, taught by somebody who adhered to the self-interest model, and the last day of the class. They were more likely to predict that others would cheat them and more likely to say that they would cheat others if they could do so without a chance to be detected. So don't go out there into this world saying that I taught you that the smart thing to do if you're in a prisoner's dilemma is to defect. That's not the smart thing to do at all. The smart thing to do is to figure out a way to solve it. And there are lots of ways to do that. And some of them involve the choice of whom you interact with. But be aware there are cheaters out there too.